Hello and welcome to Doctor Who Panel to Panel. This is Jeremy B. Mensch, your host, saying Happy Doctor Who Podcast Day and welcome to this special episode. For those of you who are longtime listeners of this podcast, I think you'll enjoy this episode because it features something that we do all the time on this podcast, which is have an interview with a creator of some sort in the world of Doctor Who comics, or a tangent to Doctor Who comics. So we'll get to that here in a minute. But first, for those of you who may be new to this podcast, maybe you are a Doctor Who podcast listener of some sort, and for Doctor Who Podcast Day, you've decided to check out some other Doctor Who podcasts you may not listen to. First of all, let me say welcome and thank you for downloading this podcast. And then let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a longtime comic book reader. I started reading comics back in the 1970s. I grew up reading comics all throughout school. When I became an adult, for 15 years of my working career, I ran a comic book and game store. So I know quite a bit about comics, but I've also been a Doctor Who fan since about 1986 or so. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, and when I discovered that there were Doctor Who comics that have been coming out basically as long as the TV show, one, I knew I had to read these comics, and two, when the advent of podcasting came about, and I discovered that nobody else was really doing a podcast about Doctor Who comics, I felt that this was kind of my calling. This was a hobby that I would enjoy doing, and so that is how this podcast, Doctor Who Panel to Panel, got started. This podcast has been around for about 9 years. I have covered lots of news. My format is usually covering, each episode we cover the news, what is new in the world of Doctor Who comics or comic-related stuff. And then I will do a review, whether it be a new story, brand new Doctor Who comic story, or something from the past. And then the best part of the episode of the show, at least my favorite part, as well as the part I think most listeners enjoy, is I chat with writers, artists, creators, people who have worked on Doctor Who comics in some way, shape, or form, or are currently working on Doctor Who comics. I love learning about the craft, learning about how people get into their careers, whether it be writing or drawing, how they got into Doctor Who, what they enjoy about the show, just general chat and finding out about what is going on in the world of Doctor Who comics or what has gone on in the world of Doctor Who comics. I take kind of my inspiration from John Centris's Word Balloon podcast, doing interviews with creators and mirroring that with my own podcast. With all that being said, let me tell you a few things before I tell you what's going to be in this episode for Doctor Who Podcast Day. First of all, let me say that if you enjoy this episode, if you subscribe to my feed, please do so. You'll get the new episodes when they come out, which is roughly every 2 weeks. But then you can also check out the back catalog. Like I said, I've been doing this podcast for 9 years now, and there's quite a bit to listen to. Unfortunately, not everything is available wherever you found this podcast, wherever you download your podcast episodes. However, if you go to archive.org and do a search for Jeremy B. Ment or Doctor Who Panel to Panel, you can find all the previous episodes as easy to download MP3 files that you can listen to on your podcast listening device or on your computer, what have you. One other thing I like to mention is that I have a website, which is DoctorWhoComics.com. I encourage everybody to check that out for a couple reasons. One, whenever a new previews catalog comes out, I put up the listings of what Doctor Who comic-related items are listed in the previews catalog, so you can go to your local comic book store and ask them to order stuff for you. But then I also include the latest Doctor Who comic news that it comes out, as well as preview images of upcoming covers, news, any kind of thing like that. And finally, on my website, there is a gentleman by the name of Rich Morris, who, back in the David Tennant era, did an online fan comic strip called The 10 Doctors. Rich is somebody who is a very talented artist who is a storyboard artist for cartoons. And so he did a Doctor Who comic strip that's kind of in the style of a storyboard. And Rich has given me the permission to reprint a page or 2 pages a week of his strip, which is a lot of fun to read. If you enjoy Doctor Who fan stories, this one is right down your alley. And I encourage everybody to check out my website on Mondays and Thursdays. That is when I have new pages put up of this wonderful strip from Rich Morris, The 10 Doctors, so make sure you check that out. And last but not least in this intro, I want to do a little service to myself and mention that I do have a Patreon page. If you go to patreon.com/Doctor Who Panel to Panel, I am trying to raise enough money to kind of help support this podcast to cover the monthly fees associated with hosting the podcast online. And I have a couple different levels in which you can help support. Please do me a favor, check it out. I would appreciate any donation that you are willing to make. I think I put out a good quality product, especially if you are interested in Doctor Who comics, because I am the sole podcast for you to listen to on a regular basis as far as putting out entertaining quality podcasts and episodes regarding Doctor Who comics. So please check that out. That is all I have to say, tooting my own horn. So now, for this episode of Doctor Who Panel to Panel for Doctor Who Podcast Day, I'm going to feature an interview I did about a month ago with somebody who is no stranger to Doctor Who comics. He is from New Zealand. His name is Paul Scoones, and he did a book called The Comic Strip Companion. It's an unofficial guide to the Doctor Who comic strips pre-Doctor Who magazine that came out from Telos Publishing, and he is hard at work on the follow-up volume, which will cover the beginning of Doctor Who magazine and the Doctor Who comic strips contained therein. But Paul has done other things in way of Doctor Who. He is somebody who is a contributor to the Blu-ray DVDs. He does a lot of the info text that you read when you watch an episode and want to learn a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff. He writes a lot of those info texts, which you'll hear about as I chat with Paul. Paul is a wonderful person to talk to. He is a good friend of mine. He is somebody who has been very supportive of this podcast since the second episode. And I think you'll enjoy this interview with a friend of mine, big Doctor Who fan, big Doctor Who contributor, Paul Scoones. All right, today on Doctor Who Panel to Panel, I am chatting with Paul Scoones, some friend of the show and somebody I haven't talked to for a long time. Paul, how's it going today?
Hello, Jeremy. Good to be back.
Yeah, I know that you're always busy doing something or another, and I know one of the things you've been working on lately is you've been doing some work for the Doctor Who magazine, the Chronicles specials that they've been coming out with.
That's right. I've got involved with those. I mean, they are fantastic. Have you seen the Chronicles magazines?
Yes, I have. They've been coming out over here on the newsstands or over in the bookstore. So I've been I haven't actually bought any, but I've been flipping through them every time I go to Barnes and Noble.
They're fantastic. I really admire them a lot. I mean, Marcus Hearn, who's the editor, he's doing a fantastic job of putting those together. I mean, they're just the principle is quite simple, really. They're just one particular year of Doctor Who. And obviously looks at each of the television stories, but also a lot of the background detail. So it has associated articles about the annuals, maybe the target books, the production techniques, the whatever it might be, the exhibitions. And when you look back at the first 4 issues, one of the things I knew, you probably feel the same way. I felt that there was no comic content to them.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Each year, there's the comics are published year round, and yet the comics weren't covered, other than as a general aside and a larger sort of overview of the year. Mm-hmm. So that I always felt that was an omission, but I'm not about to sort of start renting to Panini. It's their decision. They do what they want.
Yep, it's their choice.
I've certainly done enough articles for Marcus over the years about general articles about various aspects of comics. So, didn't want to be too greedy, but out of the blue one day, Marcus emailed me and asked if I'd be willing to do a article on the comics for one of the Chronicles. I guess he felt that maybe they had a gap in the issue, and there was just an opportunity to do something different. Okay, and so that was for I've got them in front of me there. That was for the 1967 one, the Patrick Troughton edition.
Okay.
And so that was because 1967 is Troughton's only just started as the Doctor, so it's his first year effectively. Mm-hmm. And so I got commissioned to do a 6-page article just about the comic strips from 1967, and this is just the TV comic ones, because there's a separate article done by another writer about the annuals. So it's not the annual comic strips; it's just the TV comic strips. And I felt, okay, right. This is, it was an open. I was given a word length, obviously, and I had to do a couple of box outs. Where you split out a bit of the thing.
Well,
into
six pages is quite a bit for a year's worth of a comic strip.
It's about 2,500 words from memory. I think it's about so it's a substantial piece of work. And I mean, I could have just gone through and just listed it, just gone through and described each of the stories. And I thought, well, that's, I've done that for my book. I wanted to take a slightly different route with it. So I thought, well, I'm going to hang it on an important development with the comic strip that year. So to my mind, the big important development in 1967 was TV Comic finally got the rights to the Daleks.
Yeah.
And so I thought, yeah. So, and obviously I got some of the scans of the paperwork around that. So I was able to sort of hang it on that premise that TV Century 21 comes to an end in January, and then TV Comic immediately picks up the rights to the Daleks, and then they renamed the comic strip Doctor Who and the Daleks. So they really go all in on it, and every second story is a Dalek strip. Yeah. And then about mid-year, they pack it all in suddenly. They're just going, no, we're not going to do the Daleks anymore. And that seems to be simply because it was costing them so much money with the additional rights fees that they had to pay in order to use them. Mm-hmm. So that was the focus of my article. But obviously, I went through and then talked about each of the comic strips, and particularly because later in the year you've got the Cybermen turn up in the later strips as a sort of replacement for the Daleks. So, it's a fascinating year for the comics. And so I thought this is really, really interesting. And so that went down really well. That Panini and Marcus was happy with that. So when the next one came around, he goes, "You want to do it again?" So that was 1973. So, what was the big development in 1973 in comics? Is it going to be a quiz question for you, is it?
Gee, I didn't know there was going to be questions.
I'll let you off. It was that Countdown became TV Action.
Oh, okay.
So the Countdown comic that the John Pertwee strips were appearing in was rebranded as an action comic. So it literally became TV Action. And all sort of the space-related stuff was dropped, and it became all like sort of Mission Impossible and that's
James Bondy type stuff.
Yeah, because I think that because of the cancellation of the Apollo program in '72, that everyone was feeling, well, it's all just no one's interested. No kids are interested in space anymore.
Sure, makes
Whether
sense.
that was true or not, I don't know, but that seems to be in the attitude of the publisher. So that's what I hang that article on is about how the Doctor Who strip responds to the fact that it's now in a very much an action comic rather than a sci-fi comic, and then obviously the thing that happens in the latter half of 1973, which would be legitimately another answer to the quiz question, is that TV Action is cancelled, and so obviously the action theme didn't work.
Yeah,
and TV Comic goes back. The Doctor Who strip goes back to TV Comic. Mm-hmm. So, but still with the same writers and artists. So, it's again, it was an interesting period of the comic strip. It just happened to be it was 1983 because that's what the rest of the issue was about. So, I could have been given a year where nothing went on, but it happened to be a year where I thought, well, this has got an interesting sort of narrative to it. To tie it all together, and by this point, we've sort of arranged a regular feature title called State of the Art. So whenever my article appears in the Chronicles, it's always called State of the Art, which is a title that Marcus came up with, I believe. Sure. And then the most recent one I've done is the Sylvester McCoy issue, 1988. And so that's McCoy's first full year in the strip.
Yeah.
Because his first story, Cold Day in Hell, which is John Ridgway's last regular one, and where Frobisher leaves, that finishes at the beginning of 1988, even though it starts in 1987. So I'm going to cover the end of that. And then obviously it's all the strips throughout that year with a variety of different artists replacing Ridgway, and so that's a sort of a radical development for the strip, because as you and I both know, Ridgway had really defined the look of the Doctor Who comic strip throughout the 1980s. Yeah, when I first started getting Doctor Who magazine, Ridgway was the man. He was the artist, and my entire exposure to Colin Baker and the comic strips, particularly because we were so far behind on New Zealand television, was Ridgway's illustrations.
Yeah. Yeah, so, just how amazing his art style was.
Yeah. He just totally shaped my whole impression of what the Doctor Who magazine strip should look like. For years, that was, I wasn't used to seeing any other artists on the strip. It was just Ridgway every month. Yeah. So, obviously 1988 is that big radical change where he leaves and we get a whole lot of different artists as replacements. And the key thing around that is that Sheila Cranner, who's been the editor of the strip, steps down, and Richard Starkings takes over as the comic strip editor. Mm-hmm. And John Freeman takes on running the magazine itself. So my point is that those radical changes editorially are the result of the Freeman and Starkings taking on responsibility for the strip. And they both come from a fanzine background. They're both fans of Doctor Who. They're both fans of comic strips. Whereas I think Sheila Cranner, and no disrespect to Sheila, but I think that she saw her role as much more of a group editor. She oversaw quite a large number of juvenile titles at Marvel, and like Cindy magazine and all that sort of thing. And Doctor Who magazine to her was just one of many that she had to manage in her day-to-day work. Yeah. And so to have Freeman and Starkings coming on board who were genuinely enthusiastic, they just kind of reinvigorated the magazine as a whole, but also more importantly the comic strips. So I
would say that when they came on board, they kind of decided to shake it up, for lack of a better term. It's time for a change in art style, change in how it was coming about after being used to Ridgway art, and then going to Lee Sullivan and people like that to do something different.
Yeah, this is Lee Sullivan's first year on strip, as he does the Planet of the Dead multi-Doctor story in this one, and that I think that's his very first Doctor Who comic strip. So the other thing I didn't realize at the time when I was a reader back in the 1980s is that Doctor Who magazine came very close to being cancelled altogether in 1988. The sales have been dropping ever since the cancellation a couple of years earlier, and obviously Trial of the Time Lord and had not been a huge success with the audience, and just generally the readership was dropping away rapidly. And Marvel UK were obviously looking at the numbers and going, well, is it worth continuing with Doctor Who magazine? Should we just let it die? Mm-hmm. Which seems insane now looking back on it, because obviously it's such a long-lived magazine. It's just an incredible publishing phenomenon that's been going for so many decades. But it really was a point of crisis for it, and I believe that Ridgway decided, part of the reason Ridgway decided to leave is because he saw he was party to the conversations they were having at the Marvel offices. He said he'd go in to deliver his artwork, and they would be like saying, well, we're not quite sure if we can keep going. And so he'd be like going, well, I better not. I better go and find work elsewhere.
I want to go where there's greener pastures.
That's right, where there's actually not a stable job going. So he goes to work on Hellblazer for DC. And Starkings, who's a regular editor at Marvel anyway, is brought in to save the strip effectively, cut the costs, save the strip, and Freeman is brought in to save the magazine altogether. And the way that Starkings does this is that he employs writers and artists who are right near the beginning of their career for the most part. Mm-hmm. And so they are, in terms of a page rate, they're considerably cheaper than Ridgway, who had built up such a sort of a substantial career at this point.
Yeah.
Marvel could obviously pay less for a starting out artist than they could for someone who was well established.
Well, it makes sense. If you got to cut costs, that's one of the easiest ways to do it is if I'm gonna pay less, I'm gonna have to get somebody who's willing to work for less.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a bit cruel in a sense, but it was the financial reality of keeping the magazine going. I mean, the Doctor Who magazine comic strip, and you've probably heard this from many people that you've talked to, is singularly the most expensive part of the magazine to produce.
Yep.
Because there are just so many people involved in each page, and the amount of work involved in terms of the writing and the artistry, coloring.
You can even look at that recently during COVID time when they put the strip on hiatus.
Absolutely, it was the first thing to go, wasn't it? Because
because that was the most expensive part.
Yeah, you can save the magazine by cutting the comic strip. That's the reality. And I think what might have happened is if Marcus Hearn had stuck to his guns and going, we're not dropping the comic strip, we might have seen the magazine go altogether, or possibly get cut back to a quarterly or something like that. I don't know. I'm speculating here, but I'm sure that there probably wasn't any other option on the table.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either.
Yeah, and so, I mean, by doing that, Starking's managed to keep the strip at its regular 8 pages throughout 1988, and it's only the following year that he needs to cut the page count down. And I think that's probably the first time readers were alerted to the fact that if they're cutting the page count, then things must be in a bad way.
Yep.
So yeah, it's again a fascinating year for the Doctor Who comic strip, and also too because it's the first year that it does proper crossovers with other Marvel strips.
Oh, yeah.
There's Death's Head and Crossroads of Time, and there's the Grunzellum in the Planet of the Dead story.
Yeah.
So it's...
Was it that time, too, when they were doing that strip in Incredible Hulk Presents, or was that the following year?
Following year.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's... But that is all sort of under sort of Starkings and Freeman. It's just obviously that continues on into the following year. So if I ever get to do the 1989 article, then I'll cover that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the most recent issue that they've just come out in the UK, I don't have a copy of it yet, is 1963-64. Because there's basically no comic strips for that. There's no articles from me in that. Which is a little bit of a shame. But if I had done an article, it really would have only been, Klepton Parasites and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the only 1964 strip. So.
Well, they have, I guess on the plus side, they haven't done too terribly many of these Chronicle issues, so there's still a long way to go for you to keep contributing to them.
I hope they keep going with them. I mean, they're sort of promoted as, I don't think there's necessarily the idea is to build up to a part work as such, but I'm sure if they keep selling, they'll keep doing them, and they might fill in all the years. Don't know. What would be a challenge is if they do some more of the modern ones and write about all of those, because I mean, there's a point in the David Tennant and Matt Smith era, particularly, where there's a huge explosion of comic strips. Both from Doctor Who Adventures and the IDW and Titan and all that sort of thing. It's just there's so much to cover.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah,
but I know. Well, I think it's interesting to look at the comic strips, from year to year, and they're just as important as anything else that they're going to look at in those Chronicles magazines. Whether it be the book side of things or the annuals or any products and stuff that are coming out. They definitely need to be taken a look at.
Definitely. I mean, I think you and I are very much of an equal mind that the comic strips just play such a huge part in Doctor Who's overall history, and they really need to be celebrated, and not enough people maybe pay attention to them.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know that I'm happy with the fact that they keep putting out the collected editions of the strips, and now they're even branching out and coming out with like the Daleks, the collection of the Dalek strips, the 2 volumes that have come out so far. And
yes.
And I know you've been doing some contributions to those as well, doing some kind of commentaries for some of the strips that have come out.
Yeah, they've done 2 volumes which cover all of the Dalek strips from Doctor Who magazine, Doctor Who Weekly, and it's basically 2 volumes published in them all in order. So I mean, the majority of them have been published before and in other collections, but
Yeah.
The Return of the Daleks one, for instance, has never been in a Panini graphic novel. And what was the other one that's in the other volume? I've just got them in front of me here. Is the Peter Cushing one.
Oh, yeah.
Daleks versus the Martians. That's never been reprinted in a collection before. So those are the two new ones. But it's nice just to have them all collected together. So if you're a Dalek fan and a fan of the comic strips, then it's just nice to have it all together there. And you've got all the Epsilon Dark stuffs all there in one collection. And, of course, what happened with the original run of the Panini graphic novels, it was only halfway through that they went, oh, heck, we should be doing commentaries at the back.
Yeah.
So the early volumes don't have those. So when they wanted to reprint these, of course, there's gaps. So it's not just the ones that were never been reprinted before, but it's also the ones that didn't have the commentaries the first time around.
Uh-huh.
So the editor of these collections, a guy called Ed Hammond, he got in touch with me because I assume he'd just been recommended to me by Panini, probably Marcus Hearn, and said, look, we need these commentaries written to fill these gaps in the back of the book. Are you up for doing these? These Dalek strips. And I think initially he said he was putting together a list of what the Dalek strips were that need to be included. So I helped him out with that because there were a few omissions and things in the page counts and all that sort of thing. So I helped him out with some advice on that. That's how I got involved originally. And then he said, look, can you help me out with the commentaries too? So he commissioned me to write the commentaries for 3 of the stories, which were The Return of the Daleks, which was the backup strip, The Dogs of Doom, which is the Tom Baker Dalek story, and the Peter Cushing one, which is the Daleks versus the Martians that I mentioned before. So those were the 3 that needed commentaries. And they were a challenge because, well, in some ways it was good because when I thought, well, I've got to write all this material to fill a page on each of these. And something like Return of the Daleks is like, well, that's a very old story. Does anyone remember anything anymore? But I was fortunate that several years ago, David Lloyd came to New Zealand. He's the artist who drew many of the backup strips from the Doctor Who Weekly. And he was here to do a sci-fi convention, do a signing. Usually people want to see all his V for Vendetta, get all that stuff signed.
Of course.
And I know the organizer of these conventions, and so I got in touch with him and said, look, I see that David Lloyd's coming. Would it be possible? Would you mind if I jacked up an interview with him like the day beforehand, and just sort of a one-on-one interview, just so I can just talk to him just about his Doctor Who strips? And so he said, yeah, I have no problem with that. So that's cool. So I got in touch with David Lloyd, and we jacked up a time to meet in the lobby of his hotel here in Auckland. And I just took along all of the magazines that had, all the Doctor magazines issues, all the weeklies that he'd actually had strips in, and a list of questions, and turned my dictaphone on. I basically opened the first issue and went, right, what do you remember?
Yep.
And to his credit, he was like, I don't remember anything about this strip. But there were ones where he was going, once he started looking at the artwork and studying what he could see in front of him, it was triggering memories. So he'd start off going, oh, look, it's a very long time ago, which it is. And he's done a lot of work on other things since. And so he's like, I'm just not going to be able to remember anything. But as soon as he started looking at these old issues, he's going, look. And he started pointing stuff out to me on the page and going, you see this bit here? That's how I did this. And then we overlaid this bit, and all the lettering's the wrong size on this bit. And all this stuff just started coming out. It's great. If I hadn't had those issues with me, if I hadn't thought to take all that big pile of issues with me, I think it would be a very short interview. But because he had that visual material in front of him, it just made a hell of a difference.
Yeah, it was just like looking at old family photographs.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you sit down with a family member and they can't remember anything, but you start getting the photos out and it all comes flooding back. So.
Yep. Oh, look, it's this person and that. I'm sure the artists are the same way. It's like, oh, yeah, I remember a little bit about this. I remember doing this page, or here's a problem that I encountered, or here's where how I came up with this alien, or, what have you.
So my motivation for doing this interview with him was for my book, so that I could actually, have all this background material to include in the book that I was doing. But obviously, I had all this in reserve when the opportunity to do the commentaries came out, and I'm going, well, there's David Lloyd talking about the very first backup strip that he did, The Return of the Daleks, and here's me being commissioned to do the commentary for that. So it was like a win-win on that. It was kind of a perfect. It was a gift to me from my past, if you like. I'd done the homework years ago, and so it was about 5 years earlier I'd interviewed him. I think it's about I can't remember exactly, about 2016, 2017 that I'd interviewed him. So, but I just had all this transcript all in front of me, so I was going, right, here we go. Just pull these out. So that really helped. And in the case of Dogs of Doom, which is it's credited to Pat Mills and John Wagner, but as you may know, they actually split the stories between them. So Pat Mills does two of them. He does Iron Legion and Star Beast, and John Wagner did the other two, City of the Damned and Dogs of Doom. So I thought, well, John Wagner's never really been interviewed about Dogs of Doom, so I can't even really quote from someone else's interview. So after giving this some thought and being quite worried about how I was actually going to meet, I think about 800 words I needed to write on the commentary. Okay. I was going, what am I going to do? And I'd found a Pat Mills interview. I think Vorp had done a Pat Mills interview, and the various Pat Mills has been interviewed quite extensively over the years. He's quite a big character. Yeah. And so there was lots of comments about Pat Mills' general working, on the Doctor Who strips with John Wagner, but it wasn't specifically about the story because he hadn't written that one. John Wagner had. So, and obviously I was able to include comments from Dave Gibbons as well, because there's been lots of interviews with Dave Gibbons over the years, so there's no need to re-interview him. There's lots of quotes around from him. So I got in touch with a friend of mine, David Bishop, who used to edit 2000 AD. And David's originally a New Zealander like myself, and we kept in touch even though he lives overseas now. Lives in the UK. And I said to David, because obviously David had contacts for a lot of... David's written a book called Thrill Power Overload, which is a history of 2000 AD from its beginnings right through the years. Great book. Anyone's interested in 2000 AD should definitely track that down. But I thought, well, he's probably had some contact with John Wagner at some point, so maybe he's got an email address for him. So I thought, this is a long shot. You can only try these things, right? You can only get told no. So I thought, right, I'll get in touch with David and I'll ask him. And David goes, look, I'm paraphrasing here, but David says, I'm happy to pass on your request to John Wagner with your email address so he can get in touch if he wants to, but be warned, he just doesn't respond. He's a character you can email him 20 times and he might respond once. So for whatever reason, he might be very busy, I don't know, but maybe he just doesn't like to be interviewed. But so I thought, okay, well, David's done that much for me. Thanks, David. We'll just sit back and see. And within 24 hours, pops up in my inbox as an email from John Wagner. Oh my God! I've struck the lotto. I've won the lottery because there's David telling me there's no way you're going to hear from him, but I'll send him an email anyway. Yeah, and so
like you said, exactly. The worst thing that happens is going to say no, but apparently really quick somebody might say yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's to John Wagner's credit, he said, "Look, I don't remember anything, but I'm happy for you to ask me." So I sent him questions, and at David's recommendation, I clipped out panels from the strip to illustrate the points I was asking about, because David said, you've got to trigger his memory somehow. You've got to sort of get it. In the same way, I guess, like sitting down with David Lloyd.
Exactly.
You need to give him something.
Same kind of process, show him something to trigger a memory or a thought.
Yeah. So unfortunately, in this case, it didn't help because he still didn't remember it. I don't want to do. I mean, John Wagner's had an enormous career after Doctor Who, so I'm no way disparaging him. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if someone interviewed me about something I did in 1980, I'd be struggling just as badly. So I got to the point with our email back and forth where I would quote him from Pat Mills' interviews. A quote from Pat Mills' interviews and say, is what Pat's saying here right? And John would say, no, that sounds right to me. If Pat's saying it, it must be right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm able to sort of use that in the interview, according to John Wagner.
Yeah, exactly. According to John Wagner, what Pat says is correct.
Yeah. So I'm just slightly fudging it, but the facts are the same. It's not necessarily coming directly from John Wagner in a lot of cases, and but it's a lot of fun, and there was definitely enough material to put in there to make it an interesting article. I mean, the fascinating thing about it is, as you might know, is that Dogs of Doom started off as a television proposal.
Yeah,
along with the other ones that they wrote, and they submitted them, I think, to Anthony Reid for season 16. I think it would have been the Key to Time season. And their ideas weren't taken up, and they were quite disparaged. They're quite sort of discouraged by this. And then when Des Skin employed Dave Gibbons as the regular artist when he started Doctor Who Weekly, and he was casting around for writers, Dave Gibbons knew Pat Mills and John Wagner from their work on 2000 AD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he was saying, I heard they did some Doctor Who strips that never, some ideas for television that never got taken up. Why don't you get in contact with them?
Yeah.
It was entirely down to Dave Gibbons that they wrote for Doctor Who Weekly, and they basically just exhausted their pile of ideas. So they'd submitted these 4 ideas to the television series. They'd been rejected, and so they turned each of them into a comic strip.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing for me was it gets to the end of that, and they go, well, let's write another one, and then they go, well, let's, and then they have the idea, oh, okay, it might be too good for the comic strip, so they developed it for television. And that's what became Song of the Space Whale, which spent a lot of time in development. It was originally going to be Turlough's first story, and then it was going to be the second slot of season 22, and it got replaced with Vengeance on Varos. Yeah. And the reason I know all about that is because I did the production notes of Vengeance on Varos, so I was able to research all that paperwork at the time.
Oh, okay.
So I was able to pull that into the article too, just to flesh it out a bit. And then the third one I did was a lot easier because it's a lot more current. Daleks versus the Martians from the 1990s, which Doctor Who Magazine Spring Special. And it was a lot easier to get in touch with Alan Barnes because Alan still works on Doctor Who Magazine, and Lee Sullivan, who still works on Doctor Who Magazine. And Lee must have been keeping a poker face all the time because I'm interviewing Lee Sullivan about illustrating Doctor Who Dalek strips. Which, from my perspective, he hadn't done since Children of the Revolution in the McGann era. But he knew damn well that he was illustrating the David Tennant story and couldn't tell me about it.
Didn't say one word about it.
No, so to his credit, he didn't squeak a word of hint or anything. So I was totally in the dark the whole time I was interviewing him about that. And so it is really just the same with Alan Barnes. He just wasn't letting on. So.
Yeah, well, if you're gonna get somebody to do a Dalek strip, there's no way better than Lee Sullivan, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not me keeping the secret there. I genuinely didn't know what was going on because they weren't telling me anything. So but that was a lot of fun because it's the only Peter Cushing Dalek strip in Doctor Who magazine, so it was a lot of fun just to talk about all that, and it really is so much a homage to the original comics annuals. And there's a panel which I even got I said when I submitted the article, I said, please put this panel into accompany my article, which they did, which is the very famous one from the original Dalek annual, where you've got the Dalek hover disc flying through past the city with the two humans clinging onto the side of it, and it's Mary and Jeff Stone from the original Dalek annual, and though I should say the Dalek book from 1964, and so that. In the Daleks versus the Martians, it's almost a reproduction of that same angle with the Dalek on the hover disc with Louise, who's the doctor, Peter Cushing's doctor's companion, clinging to the railing. So it's a lovely bit of comparison.
Yep.
I thought it was fun too. The story revolves around the Martian Sphinx, if you remember, and as I noted in my commentary, that the mystery of the Martian Sphinx was still a thing in 1996 when the strip was published. Within a couple of years, obviously the NASA's global surveyor sent back pictures that showed there was no such face on Mars.
Yeah.
So if the strip had been published a couple of years later, it had been completely debunked. So it's nice little things like that.
Still would have made for a good story, though.
Yeah, but it's nice little trivia like that you can put into the into the commentary.
Yep, that is true. Well, I know I enjoyed those Dalek compilations that Panini put out. I'm hoping that they might kind of branch out and do maybe a Cybermen one to accompany that. To me, that makes perfect sense.
Can I just say that I can't say anything? You can read into that what you want, but it hasn't been announced.
Well, as Stan Lee would say, enough said.
Yeah, so. I hope that they do a lot more of these graphic novels, because I mean they've never reached the end of the stuff that from the Marvel era. There's still strips to mop up from the specials and the backup strips. So
I think as far as the backup strips go, I think this is kind of to me, it's a perfect way to kind of get them out there into collected editions, because it's kind of tough to do any other way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going to get to a point where it's going to have to be an assortment, because you can't do a whole book full of Silurians or Ogrons or whatever. But you know what I mean? Hopefully it all gets done eventually. It'd be lovely to see all the Alan Moore Time Lord strips collected, for instance, because I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
The daunting thing too would be to write commentaries for each of those. so on one hand, I'm going, oh, it'd be great to do these. And on the other hand, oh my goodness, it's going to be difficult because some of these people aren't available for interviews or aren't alive anymore. So I mean, someone like Steve Moore, for instance, would be fantastic to interview, but unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Steve Dillon's no longer with us. So these are the people who shaped a lot of those early strips. Oh well, we'll just make do with what I've got. Yep,
exactly.
But and also too, and I have pitched this to Panini in the past, and for whatever reason, it hasn't progressed at all. And I even put together quite a detailed proposal for it, was to do a 3-volume collection of the Countdown and TV action strips. And I thought, that would be fantastic.
Oh, I would love that. That would be amazing.
Especially after Panini did the TV Century 21 Dalek collection, which was just beautiful. Mm-hmm. To do something like that for the Countdown stuff would just be, to me, it's a no-brainer. But I think that there's two challenges with that. One is that a lot of the original artwork is lost, so it would necessarily have to be scans from the artwork, and I think from the published comics.
Yeah,
I think that even with the best will in the world and the most restoration, it's still going to be obvious, I think, that it's going to be a reproduction rather than the original art. And the second thing is, as you probably know, is that quite a lot of them are 2-page spreads. Mm-hmm. So with the text captions and speech balloons go across that center line, and that's really, really hard to do if you're doing a bound book, because you're going to lose some of that center line. So and they've done, you might have seen it, they've done a couple of individual Countdown stories and Perry Goldwald did some fantastic work in terms of.
In fact, that's what I was going to mention, is the one that when they came out, that special Doctor Who magazine issue about the 70s, where they had that.
They did Sub-Zero. Yeah, the
Sub-Zero was
Sub-Zero.
the one
Yeah.
they did, and where they
Yeah.
were able to fix that
Yeah. So I mean, to my mind, it's just
the gutter section there in the middle.
Yeah,
and
if they can do it for that one, they can.
Yeah, exactly. They were able to move the word balloons around and get it so it looked perfect.
Yeah, it's proof of concept that it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's just obviously there's a lot of work involved in terms of restoration and editing the artwork to make that possible. But I think the demand's there. Everyone I ever speak to about the comics is always like going, when are they going to do the countdown stuff?
Yeah, I totally agree. The same
That's
thing
the most
with me.
desirable of the pre-Marvel stuff that's never been collected.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, the TV comic stuff would be lovely to have, but let's face it, some of it's a bit ropey in terms of quality. It's not. It wasn't necessarily always drawn or written to the best standard. And so, I think you probably might want to be more selective of what you might want to reprint from the TV comic era. But I think that the countdown and TV action stuff is really consistently beautiful to look at and well written and is deserving of its own collection.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know the people that I've talked to about the possible production of something like that, they've always said that without having the original artwork to go off of, the production quality wouldn't be up to their standards. But my response to that is always, well, something's better than nothing.
I was about to say exactly the same thing. Yeah.
If you can take scan the pages of the issues and clean them up to the best of your ability, it's still going to look head and shoulders above what a back issue of that would be. And having that collected together would be great on the shelf.
And I know you interviewed Marcus about this a while ago, but when they did the TV Central 21 Dalek collection, they didn't. He most of it was scanned from the original artwork, but there were, I can't remember, maybe 10 or 20 pages that they couldn't locate, so they were scanned from the printed copies and then cleaned up. But I'm damned if I can tell which ones they are.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So, which
exactly,
to my mind,
if you can't tell the difference between the ones that were original art, ones that were cleaned up and scanned from the comic pages,
it can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. It's just how much it costs and what they think they can make off of something like that.
Look, I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that the difference between, I mean, for instance, with these Dalek graphic novel collections, the vast majority of those strips have been cleaned up and reprinted before, and so they've already got the digital files at Panini. So it's a matter of dropping them into a new template and cleaning up the ones that they haven't reprinted before. So it's a no-brainer in terms of cost of production versus return on sales. So it's very clear that these are economical books to produce.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that the countdown ones, they'd be looking at them and going, it's going to cost us a bomb to do them. But, it's probably a lot of people who buy
it. yeah, exactly. Well, I'm hoping that with the Star Beast being turned into one of the specials that we're getting for the anniversary, that will kind of put maybe a little bit more of a focus or a new focus on the comic strips that have come out in the past.
What's the bet that we will get a reprint of Star Beast before year's end?
I was just thinking, I saw something, I believe, on Facebook just a week or so ago saying that they were working on some sort of a new edition of the Star Beast to come out.
Well, there you go.
So, but I would, and I think it's supposed to come out like in October, right before the special.
Sure.
And I'm hoping that if they come out with that and that sells really well, people go, hey, the Star Beast is based on a comic strip for those people that haven't heard that already. That maybe they'll start going, maybe we should come out with either like new editions of the previous graphic novels that they've come out with for, Fourth Doctor, Fifth Doctor, back some of the original stuff, maybe with commentaries that they didn't put into the original ones, or just some sort of a new collection.
I mean, from a personal perspective, obviously, I'd love for them to have their commentaries and all.
Of course,
but also too, I mean, this is probably a purely selfish thing. I'd love for them to do deluxe hardback editions of the books too.
Oh yeah, me too.
I mean,
I love in a heartbeat.
I love the ones. I don't know if you ever saw them because I know they didn't come out in America. But when they did the complete history, they did a limited run of hardback graphic novels for the.
I heard of them and I saw pictures, but I never actually saw them up close.
Now they're beautiful. I mean, the interior is pretty much the same as the originals, but just the feel of having that properly bound hardback edition. They're beautiful to hold, beautiful to look at, and if they were all done like that, it would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So I've got fingers crossed. If you say, if the rumors are true and they do a Star Beast, then maybe we'll get a nice deluxe hardcover edition.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That'd be nice.
So
hopefully, any are listening to this podcast.
yeah, hopefully.
It's like a pitching to them, doesn't it?
I always hope that whenever I talk about stuff that I wish for, is like, I hope somebody at Panini is listening to this, so that way they, put some bug in their ear and somebody goes, "Oh, that's a really good idea. I'm glad somebody thought of that."
Listeners, write into Panini and tell them what you'd like to see.
Exactly. So are you anxiously awaiting the Star Beast on your TV screen like the rest of us?
Yeah, it seems like we've been waiting a very long time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah, I mean the trailer was ages ago. It's but I mean I'm enthusiastic. I'm looking forward to any new Doctor Who really. But I mean the thing for me with the Star Beast is like going, well, okay, they're probably taking the basic idea of it, and from what I can pick up from the trailer, it's. No, I might be completely wrong, so I'll put it down now, and you can go back to this podcast when the episode comes out. But the suspicion that what the story is that it's about Donna's daughter, Rose Noble, played by Yasmin Finney, and she's playing the part of Sharon in the original Star Beast. Okay. I think she's what we see in the trailer. I think she's the one who discovers Beep the meat. And assuming that's what he's going to be called, and that's the idea. They're shoehorning the whole sort of Donna Noble family into the into the Star Beast story. So it's replacing Fudge and Sharon and Mrs. Higgins. Yeah. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so Donna Noble might be having a cup of tea in the kitchen with the Wrath Warriors, for instance. I don't quite know, but that's my suspicion that that's the way they'll go with it. So. And to my mind, because Russell T Davies is such a fan of the domestic sort of kitchen drama sort of approach to Doctor Who with the families and everything, that this Star Beast is a particularly appealing story for him, because it's one of the first Doctor Who comic strips that really does domestic everyday life clashing with a Doctor Who plot.
Yeah.
Because it's school kids and a mother, a solo mum, and all this sort of thing, and in a housing sort of development, and and not a it's not sort of it's a working class environment in Black Castle, and it just sort of like, this is not something we normally see in Doctor Who. So it's quite I think for all the reasons. I mean, Star Beast is just such a well remembered and well loved story.
Yeah, I think that's why. I think Russell is one of those who finally remembers that story. I think that's kind of why he went for it.
Yeah, I mean, he's been on record saying that he's been a subscriber for Doctor Who magazine since probably the very beginning, and there's one issue that's actually got a letter from him praising the comic strip as well. So it's a no-brainer that he'd want to do that. And the interesting thing is are they going to leave it at that, or is the rest of the Doctor Who magazine comic strips open fodder for adaptations? Might we see later on maybe something like, I don't know, The Gift with the musicians, because obviously Russell's hinted at doing like a sort of a musical episode of Doctor Who. So
yeah.
I don't know. It's intriguing that it could be open right up for for all sorts of comic strips. I mean, that's mind-boggling. Might we see the Voyager arc done as a television story? I mean, that almost seems impossible, doesn't it? But
it does. That one. I still just the sheer magnitude of that story and how vast and spacious and stuff it is.
Or for the very same reason, Tides of Time would just be an impossible story to do.
Yeah.
I'd like to see something like 4D vistas with the ice warriors in the Antarctica. It would just be like, or it's the Arctic. Sorry, it's the Arctic, isn't it? But it's just Yeah, something like that. Just a real action epic. But yeah, I mean, the potential is vast.
There is. There's
It is. Coming back to your point, yeah, I'm very excited. And also too because I'm still working on this great albatross of a book that's been hanging around my head for years.
That was good. I was saving that one for last. I was going to ask how work is going on volume 2.
I don't want to publish it. I don't want to publish it at the moment because I want to include the stuff about the Star Beast in the book. So the ideal time to publish is next year once the Star Beast is out there, and I can actually have a chapter in the book comparing the two. So
yeah, I guess that's true. So
that's the plan.
It was just working.
Don't hold me to
the
it,
best that way.
What seems to happen is every time I tell someone I'm getting close to finishing the book, something comes up and I have to put it aside again. I do lead such a busy life and I do so many jobs that trying to find time. I mean, it's all very well I say to you, I'm doing this commentary or I'm doing this article for Doctor Who magazine, but the reality is that from beginning to end, I can write those in 2 or 3 days maximum because they're relatively short.
Yeah.
And so I can do that much on the book, but it's only a small dent in which is a phenomenally long book. So, yes, I'm always adding bits to the book, but you know what I mean. It's still not quite finished. But like I say, that's an incentive now. Once the Star Beast is out there, and I can do a proper article to go in the book. Because I think if the book was published now, because it's going to cover Star Beast, everyone would be going, "Well, why aren't you talking about the television story?"
Yeah.
So it's important now, I think, to wait until it's out.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. And
maybe pencil it in for next year.
So since you stole my final question, are you still doing the commentaries for the DVD and Blu-ray releases?
Yes, I am. And I have to be careful again because some of the ones I worked on haven't been announced yet. I'm sorry to be so secretive with you, but the most recent one that's come out that I've actually worked on. That actually I can tell you about is probably Mark of the Rani. And that's on season 22. I'd done Venus of Varos on the same one, but that's obviously I'd done that for the DVD. So I tweaked it basically. My editor Martin Wiggins and I sat down and went, okay, what do we want to update all these years later? So we made some changes and updated some stuff about the actors and everything, and changed a bit of the spelling and some of the subtitles are going, well, that wasn't particularly well written. It was my own work, but going, once you've written something years later, coming back to it, you can see where you made the,
I could have said that better.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been able to do that for Venus on Varos, and before that I did that for Dragonfire on the season 24 box set too. Just revising the work but not completely rewriting it, just tidying it up a bit. So it's mostly 90% the original subtitles. So
for Mark of the Rani, you said that you did that one.
That's a complete fresh. That's from scratch.
Okay,
because Mark of the Rani was originally one of the earliest DVDs. It's one of and those ones, the subtitles didn't have access to all the production paperwork. So they were largely based on what we knew about the stories from articles in Doctor Who magazine and interviews with the actors and everything. Whereas the way that we do the commentaries now, I say now, I mean ever since about 2008 when I first started working on them, is we look at the way I describe it, you forget everything you know about the story and start from scratch again. So you're not encumbered by false stories. I mean, there's one I'm working on at the moment, which I obviously I'd love to be able to tell you about, but there is a very long, and if I tell you the general now, when it's announced, you'll go, that's what he was talking about. But there's a very long established general understanding about why the story happened as it did, where it did, that is completely wrong. You go into reference books, the way that's talked about it, it's completely wrong, because when you get access to the paperwork, which obviously these writers who wrote the books at the time didn't have access, so they were just surmising what had gone on. Once you see the paperwork, you go, no, that's not how it happened at all. So it's the commentaries give you the opportunity just to sort of clear the decks in terms of what you think you know about the story and start from scratch again. And in this case, I was so doubting myself that I actually emailed a couple of the other people that work on these things, like Chris Chapman, who does some of the documentaries, and a couple of other people, Richard Bignell, who does the archiving of the paperwork. Oh, he does such a phenomenal work on that, scanning all the scripts and scanning all the paperwork. What a thankless task. But anyway, so I emailed them and said, this is what I've come up with based on what's on the paperwork. Am I right? Because it contradicts all of the reference books. And they go, yep. What you're saying is absolutely correct. So yeah, there is a big myth to be busted when that comes out. So yeah, I'm quite.
Well, that's interesting to hear, because that kind of gives me a new outlook on the subtitles and the production notes that you do, especially for the ones that have all new ones, because I don't think a lot of people know that the some of the first DVDs that came out, like you said, didn't have access. The people that wrote up all those the subtitles and production notes didn't have access to all the information. So now, having all that extra information, that gives you a whole fresh outlook on things and a whole new things to talk about.
As a general rule, and I think the DVD started in about 2002, 2003. So from then up to about, I think, 2009, those ones are the ones that need to be redone. So they've redone some of them because, remember, there was the revisitations box sets with the DVDs, and so some of them did special editions of the DVDs. So they've been redone, and I did some of those. I did, for instance, Venus on Varos. I did Resurrection of the Daleks, and Kaiser Androzani are all ones where we did a revised version of the DVD. And so I got to do the subtitles for them. So when they come up for Blu-ray at some point in the future, the work's been done, but I can still go back and change anything I'm not happy with.
Yep.
But there are then other stories. I mean, we're only halfway through the range, aren't we? If we look at the classic series, it's basically 13 box sets. So we're literally halfway through 26 seasons. It's the halfway point. Yep. So for those remaining 13 seasons, which may come out in any order, and even that changes. So even though I know what the next 2 or 3 box sets are going to be, it may not be the case, because the order keeps changing all the time. So the order in which I get commissioned to write these subtitles is not the order in which they come out. I'll give you an example. Just before we went into COVID lockdown in 2020, the first time around.
Yep.
For New Zealand, anyway. I don't know what it was like for you, but we went into COVID lockdown in about mid-2020, and I was working on a set of subtitles, and I thought, I'm so far behind on the set of subtitles, I'm panicking because I'm not going to be able to deliver it. But because we went into lockdown and all the rest of my work shut down, I was going, I've got the time to finish it. This is a blessing. The universe has spoken to me and gone, here is the time you needed to get this work you're panicking about done. And so I got the set of subtitles for this story finished, and I sent it off to my editor on time, by deadline, which I never would have been able to do if it hadn't been for lockdown. It still has not come out.
Oh, really?
And we are 3 years later. It hasn't been announced. It hasn't come out. I didn't need to do that, did I? All
that rushing around for nothing.
But on the other hand, it's done.
Yep,
it's locked out. It's it's been delivered. It's been edited. It's ready to go when the BBC's ready. So there's no worry that I'm suddenly going to get an email going, we need it next week. So I've cleared my debts, if nothing else, and I've been paid for it. So I'm not waiting on payment. That's all taken care of. So I'm happy.
Awesome.
I just like to be able to tell people about it, because that's the one thing I can't say anything until they, for obvious reasons, I can't.
Definitely.
Until they do the announcement. So hopefully any day now, keep an eye on social media, because I'm sure we must be going to get an announcement any day. I don't know for a fact. I just feel like it's time.
I know when I was listening to Radio Free Scarl, I think it was last weekend, they said that we're due for another Blu-ray announcement. Anytime now.
It does feel like that. Yeah, and it's obviously been the anniversary year. Surely they want to get something out this year.
Yeah, definitely.
We're midway through the year and we haven't had an announcement. I'm going, yeah, it's got to be any day.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I say, I don't even know which one it's going to be because they keep chopping and changing. It might be a complete one. It might be one I haven't worked on because for instance, I haven't worked on any of the '60s stories, so because they don't need redoing on the commentaries because they're all considered particularly well done. So because they were released later in the range, they don't they're all done properly the first time round. Yeah. And but I did do the audio commentary for The Lion. I recorded that not so long ago. So I actually pitched that to Russell Minton, who's the editor of the Blu-ray range, and said, look, how about this for an idea? Because I think when we recorded it, we were still in lockdown maybe or COVID restricted things anyway. So everyone was recording stuff from their own homes, and I'm going, well, yes, we're in New Zealand and you're in the UK, but this is how you do stuff anyway. So what's the difference? So because normally they'd all get together in a studio in London to do the recording of the commentaries, but they'd had to work to a new way of doing things with the COVID.
Yeah, because of COVID.
So they had this system that they'd devised for obviously the actors and everyone else who was doing the commentaries, whereby we had the video of the episode playing in one stream, and on a completely different audio stream, we were recording our commentary.
Oh, okay.
And there was myself, Neil Lambis, Bruce Grenville, Steve Roberts, and Toby Haydock doing the moderation for it. And so we just chatted for one episode about. We didn't actually talk about anything we were seeing on screen, so it might not have been there, but it helped us to keep the time. We knew when we ran out of time.
We
were just talking about finding and returning the lion. So it was nice that finally to get that on an official thing, because over the years, it seems for probably just through accidental rather than any particular agenda, is that the people who, like myself, who are involved in finding the episode haven't really been acknowledged on anything. Whenever they've released the story, particularly on the original VHS, there was no mention of us. So even though we've done the legwork of actually getting the story back to them. So it was nice to finally be on an official release talking about our part in the find. So that and particularly Neil, who's someone who's never really probably had his part in the find particularly well talked about. He got to say firsthand about his involvement. So that was really great thing to do. I felt very like we were finally like given our due, if you like. And if anyone's got the season 2 Blu-ray box set, then I recommend put on the audio commentary for The Lion and have a listen to us talking about that.
Definitely. It sounds like you got your fingers in all sorts of different areas of Doctor Who, whether it be the subtitle production notes or the commentaries for the Panini graphic novels or the Chronicles issues that are coming out. You're just a busy man on the Doctor Who front.
And we haven't even talked about Vorp Vorp.
Yeah, we haven't even
which you and I are both involved in.
Yep. Well, that one. I know I enjoy flipping from issue to issue. I still haven't finished reading the most recent issue. It's still sitting here on my stand right beside me, and every once in a while I just grab it and read articles.
Do you know the terrible thing? When I get the issue, I don't read them.
Oh, really?
And the reason for that is quite obvious when I tell you. It's because I've proofread all the different versions of it.
Oh, yeah. So you've already read it numerous times over.
I've been the fact checker and proofreader for Vorp Vorp ever since the first issue.
Oh, really?
And so I've just talked to Colin Brockhurst, who's the editor, all the way through. We've never met. I've just talked to him on email all the way through. And I think what happened was originally I got in touch with him when they announced they were doing the first issue, and I was going, well, I'm doing a book about comic strips because I don't think my book had come out at that point. Mm-hmm. And so we just basically started talking about Doctor Who comic strips, and so he started sending me pages from the first issue he was working on, and I was pointing out, well, you've got that bit wrong, and that's great, but that doesn't make sense. And he's going, well, can you proofread the rest of it for me? And I've just kept going. So, I mean, literally every time Colin will just send me a batch of pages, and then I'll make changes on them. He'll obviously go through those and decide if he wants to make those changes or not, and then he'll send me the corrected versions, and I'll read them again to make sure that the changes he's made are okay, and I might point out something else or something else that'll change. And so by the time the actual printed copy arrives in the mail, I'm going, I've read this so many times that I don't need to read it, because it's just also, it's also familiar to me. But it's so lovely to have a physical copy of something that I've been staring at on a computer screen for months and months and months.
Oh, yeah, I totally understand that.
The amount of work that Colin puts into that is just phenomenal. It's just so immaculately designed. Yeah, and it's all it's just a fanzine. It's non-profit fanzine. He's not a job for him.
That's what I say every single issue. It's like, this is the most professional looking fan production of anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's like there's magazines that are on the newsstands that don't look half as good as Warp issues do.
Yeah.
And,
a while ago, I wrote an article about my my DVD, my Blu-ray commentary work for Celestial Toy Room, which is a Doctor Appreciation Society fanzine. And I made a comment on social media going, I haven't written for a fanzine in years. And Colin goes, you write for what? And I go, yeah, but I don't instinctually think of it as a fanzine. It just doesn't feel to me.
No.
It's as good as anything that Panini puts out. So, on one hand, I'm going, this is fantastic. On the other hand, I'm going, Colin, I really wish that, this could be a professional venture for you, because, I just feel for him putting so much work in for just for the love of it, basically. So,
yeah. And I know they're hoping to get another issue out in time for the anniversary from when I talked to Gareth. So,
no doubt there'll be more proofreading for me.
I know a lot of the proofreading. You can make contributions too, don't you? Some articles and stuff.
The article I wrote. I wrote the article on the Golden Wonder comic strips, but I'd done that for the previous issue, and it got held over. So that was done quite some time ago. And the other one I did, which was a lot of fun, was the Karen McCoy script for the animated series that never happened.
Oh, okay.
And that was fascinating, because all I got sent was the audio recording of a group of fans in a hotel room reading the script aloud, performing the voices. So I had to work out what they were saying, because they were sending it up a little bit. So I also had to make a judgment call about were they making a joke, or was it actually what the script was saying. And also, too, there were other people in the hotel room. There was a couple of kids screaming and yelling, and their mother trying to calm them down and everything. So it was a challenging audio to get through. It wasn't Big Finish, put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy with how the article turned out, and something that only came to light, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying so, but one of the podcasts I follow and have been a guest on is Jason Miller's Target podcast.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's called Doctor Who Literature. And well worth checking out. I follow that every week. And Jason, I've been a guest on his podcast, and I think I'm booked in to be again at some point. And he emailed me shortly after the Vorp issue came out and go, you do realize I'm one of the voices on that audio? And I hadn't picked it up. Because it was when he was a kid, he was a teenager or whatever.
Sure.
And he's obviously,
way back when.
Yeah, way back when. So I just didn't pick up the fact that he was playing this part on this audio. So
well, what a coincidence.
But it was quite great too, because I was saying, because I'm trying to work out what I think I can hear on the audio. So I was saying, well, is it true that this is the case? Is it? And one of the things that Colin and I were speculating about is whether everyone was drunk, because there's a convention.
Yeah, it would make sense.
But it is American fan enthusiasm, apparently, and everyone was completely sober. But I guess from a more reserved British perspective, it sounded like they were all drunk. So you might want to attribute that to a difference between American and British fandom, maybe.
Yeah. The Americans, we like to have our alcohol.
Yeah, but it sounded like a lot of it sounded like a lot of fun.
That's good. Well, I know for me, it's fun to see all the stuff that you do for Doctor Who, whether it be commentaries or the eventually upcoming comic book or comic strip companion.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Yep. So Paul, it's always a pleasure to chat with you and get caught up. It's always too long between our conversations, so
Absolutely.
I'm glad to hear everything's going well, and
That's an
I'm already
incentive
looking.
for me. Yeah, it's an incentive for me to finish the book because then you can have me back on, right?
Oh, definitely. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
Awesome.
So thank you for supporting my podcast, and thank you, my friend. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Pleasure too.
I hope you enjoyed that chat with Paul Scoones. Paul, like I said, is a great friend of the podcast. He is somebody who's super knowledgeable when it comes to Doctor Who comic strips, and he is also a great contributor to Doctor Who in way of stuff that he has done in the past and currently for Doctor Who Blu-rays and DVDs, and it's always great to chat with Paul. I hope you enjoyed that interview with him. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Doctor Who Panel to Panel as well. If you are a longtime listener, thank you for downloading this episode and listening to it. And if you are new to this podcast, I hope you enjoyed what you heard. If you enjoyed it and are a fan of Doctor Who Comics, I encourage you to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and add this onto your podcast listening. A new episode number 165, will be out in just a few days' time. And then, pretty much like clockwork, every 2 weeks a new episode comes out. I think you'll enjoy what you hear. If you enjoyed this episode, there'll be more like it in the future. So, with all this being said, I hope you enjoyed Doctor Who Podcast Day. I hope you took an opportunity to check out some of the other podcasts in the world of Doctor Who that you may not normally listen to. I know that's what I have done myself. And until next episode of Doctor Who Panel to Panel, this is Jeremy Bement saying bye. Doctor Who Panel to Panel, the podcast about Doctor Who comics, thanks you for downloading this episode. Let us know what you thought about this episode or of Doctor Who comics in general. You can find us socially on Facebook at Doctor Who Panel to Panel, on Twitter at Doctor Who P2P, 2 being the number 2, and online at DoctorWhoComics.com. Download previous episodes via your favorite podcast service and find the complete catalog of episodes featuring amazing interviews with creators past and present at archive.org. Just search for Doctor Who Panel to Panel. Thank you.